Hi, my name is James. Welcome to Kings Find Woodworking. So I actually made this video for our community. We have a community on Facebook, the Kings Find Woodworking community. There's been a lot of discussions on jointers and planers in there and how to use them and the best way to use them and whether or not they're even necessary. And if you have a jointer, do you really need a planer? So I put this together for them. And if you happen to be interested in joining our community, it's on Facebook. I'll put a link to that in the description below. But this for you guys, I just want to say hi and thanks for everything. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about jointers and planers, the difference between the two, what they're used for, exactly how to use them, what the advantages are, and kind of the science behind how they work. There's a very specific sequence that you have to follow in order to successfully use these two tools, and I'll explain to you what that sequence is, and I'll explain to you why you have to follow that sequence. But first, let's talk about why you might even need a jointer or a planer in the first case. So a lot of times you might go to your lumber yard and you'll pick out lumber that's just great. It's nice and flat, it's already been smoothed, they've already taken the surface through the planer, they've already jointed an edge, and it's nice and square. This angle, say for example here to here is square, and it's all set and you can use it. But at the same time, sometimes you'll take that lumber home and you'll see that lumber might have a defect, like this one. This has a twist in it. You can't really build furniture with lumber that has a twist in it. Okay, so the defects that we're talking about, they're called warping defects. And warping defects mean there's something wrong with the wood or the shape of the wood the way it is, and it's going to have to go through a jointer and a planer. So I'm going to talk about them. There's 4 different types. When people say wood is warped, it actually means one of 4 things. Not everybody knows that, but I'm going to cover that with you now. This one you know, this is a twist. When one corner is up, and if you push the opposing corner, the board will rock back and forth. That's a twist. That's a twist defect. Another defect this board exhibits here, this board has a bow. So you hold it end to end, and over the length of the board, you can see the board rocks up and down. That is a bow, and that is a type of warping defect. Another type of warping defect that is common is this. When the wood is shaped in this direction, that's called a cup. This is a cupping defect. And the final type of defect, which we probably see a little bit less frequently, is this one. This is a crook. It's a little bit hard to see, but the wood is shaped in an arch here, and this is a crook. We can sometimes see because it'll rock this way. So when the lumber's flat here, you'll see the wood just swoops off in that direction. That's a crook. And these are the 4 types of warping defects that we'll see, and all of these we can fix with a jointer and a planer. So I want to show you a couple of other issues with wood. These aren't defects, but these just have to do with errors that creep in when this wood is being made. When it's being cut from the mill, or when it's surfaced at the mill, or when it's surfaced by the hardwood dealer. And that is that they may not always be of uniform thickness or uniform width. And I'll show you what I've done here is I've drawn this here. If you can see this, this wood is actually thicker on this side than it is on this side. And I've illustrated that by drawing in this red line here. This lower red line is actually parallel to the bottom surface of the wood. So you can see this wood is almost a little over, actually a 1/4 of an inch thicker there than it is here. And that's a problem. With problems like this, which are the most common problems, you actually have to have both a jointer and a planer, and we'll talk about why that is. Here's another problem. It's very similar to that, and that if we look at the edge of the wood, this wood is actually thicker on one side than it is on the other side. And this is also a common problem that you might see when wood comes from a mill or wood that's rough cut. And this type of a problem will also require both a jointer and a planer to fix. And now I'll show you why that is. A common misconception is that a jointer will cure all of the problems. People think that if I take a piece of wood, I run it on the jointer here, keeping the back flat to the fence, and I rotate it 90 degrees, run it this way, keeping it flat here and here, rotate 90 degrees, do the same, rotate the final 90 degrees and do the same, then I'm going to have a piece of wood that's square and ready to build furniture with. That's just not true. What I will achieve is I'll get a 90-degree corner between here and here, And in fact, I'll get one at each of these four corners. What it won't do, however, is correct this problem. No matter how many times I do this, my board is always going to be thicker on this side than it is on that side. The jointer won't cure that problem. I'm just going to make some pencil marks on here to show that we've jointed these surfaces. Okay, so I've done all four sides of this. All of the pencil marks are gone. And we can see what we have achieved here. I do have a square there. I have a square there. I have a square there. And of course, I have a square there. So those four sides are square. But you can see that the problem here still persists. Here we have a full inch thickness. And on the other side over here, it's about 5/8 of an inch thick. So I haven't cured the problem of being thicker on one side than the other. So using just a jointer in order to surface this wood, if it's not the same thickness throughout, isn't going to work for us. So this piece of wood right now is no good to build furniture with. I can't have wood that's thicker on one side than it is on the other. Okay, so I want to show you the same thing with this piece of wood. This was the piece of wood that happened to be thicker on this edge than this edge. So it's a similar situation where the thickness changes here, except in this case the thickness changes from side to side. So I'm going to send this thing through the jointer and see if this fixes it. So I'm going to mark up our four edges so that I know they're getting fully jointed. And we need to remove a little bit more there. Okay. Okay, so we can see the exact same thing occurred here. I have jointed all four of these edges, but my problem still persists. The red line didn't go away here, of course, because I didn't do anything with that face, but still persists. The wood is thicker here than it is here. Now it is possible, depending on the sequence how you put this through, that you can correct this problem, but I just showed you that if you're not careful in doing that, that you can actually joint all four sides and still have this problem. So for this too, ideally, you still need a planer to correct it. So with this particular problem, there is a small possibility that you could correct it with the jointer, because what you can do is you can line it up in such a way so that this surface, you keep this one square with the fence, and then you can gradually cut it down again and again and again until it cleans this surface or gets the surface down to square. The problem is this is a really relatively short distance compared to this, and it's hard to hold this perfectly square. The best thing to do in this case, of course, is to send this over to your planer where it has the whole bottom as a reference surface and the planer cuts stuff off the top. So it is possible to fix this on a jointer. I don't know how accurate you could do it, but don't forget the original problem that we had where the board is thicker on one end and narrower on the other end. This is an impossible fix on the jointer, and you have no choice. If you want to get lumber that looks like this to be usable as furniture, you must have a planer. Okay, so I want to say something else about this piece. This is this type of an issue where the wood is not uniform thickness all the way across. This is a pretty common issue, especially when you buy rough stock. And what I've done is I've really exaggerated it to prove a point, showing that it's very thick here and very thin there. In fact, this is actually a really common problem, and it may not be thick here and thin there. It might be just a little thicker in the middle, or it might be just a little thinner in the middle. There could be any number of situations where it does have to see both the jointer and the planer. I've just sort of exaggerated this to show you what the issue might be. But at any rate, I'm going to show you now how the planer can fix the job that the jointer can't. So this side, either side really, but this side went over the surface of the jointer. So this is going to be my reference surface. And my reference surface is going to ride flat along the bed of the planer. And so I'll be cutting material off of the top of this in order to get it down so that it's parallel all the way across with the bottom. So I'm going to make some marks here. And this is telling me that, and showing you, this is the material that's got to come off to get it down. Obviously more has to come off from this side than that side. So now I'm just going to go ahead and joint this real quick. Okay, I guess I mean plane, not joint. Okay, so that's done, and hopefully you could see what I was doing as I was showing it to the camera partway through. We saw part of the lines gone, then after the next pass a little more lines were gone, next pass a few more, and then finally it completed the whole thing. We can also look, if we're checking it out sideways, it looks like it's about uniformly thick. So let's just check that with some calipers here. And I've got about 0.597 inches in thickness. And we'll check the other side. And I've got about 0.59, 596, 597, almost exactly the same, right to the thousandth of an inch once I've got that squeezed tight. So that's it. So this board is now parallel on both sides. This side is exactly parallel to this side. So the order of operations really is to flatten one edge on the jointer, then you bring it to the planer, you'll flip it, you'll have the planer cut the other edge, the other face, so that the two faces are parallel. After this, we'll take this piece back to the jointer, and then we'll turn it on its edge, and we'll get these two sides, or these two edges, to become square with these faces. And then you have a perfectly square board with which you can make furniture. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the procedure from beginning to end on a piece of rough stock. This is walnut. This is rough cut from the mill. I'm going to show you start to finish exactly how to turn this into a usable piece of wood that we can make furniture with. You'll remember this was the piece that had the bow in it, where when I put it this way, it's lifting up on that end and vice versa. And this way, there's sort of an arch there and it's got a gap at the bottom. So I'll show you how to do this. So the first step in any operation in order to get lumber square and ready to use is we have to mill one face flat. The only way to do that is with a jointer. We mill one face flat. Now I have two ways to do it. I could do this face first, but the problem is if I put this face down to mill flat first, sometimes I'll start out by putting pressure here, and as it gets partway through the tool, I'll put pressure here, which will lift that end up. So in a sense, I'm putting this through my jointer like this. And I could continue this bow and not correct the problem. So traditionally what I will do is I'll turn them upside down this way. So it's sort of like an upside down smiley face, and that's how I'll process my first side flat on the jointer. So like I said, the first thing we're going to do is make one side flat with the jointer, and that's what I'm going to do now. Have one flat side. This is probably not the best piece to show as an example because it's very figured, so it might not look like it's perfectly smooth, but it actually is. So we can also test that. I can put that down here. We can see that it's very flat along this side. What we can also see is that this board is thicker in the middle, thinner here, and thinner on that side. And that makes sense because if you can recall, it had a bow like this. So we had to take some off here and some off of here to get it down to flat, but of course the middle stayed thicker because the middle is where it was missing when I was cutting in the first place. Okay, so now with one side flat, we're going to go directly to the planer. There's no point in jointing any edges really at this point yet. The best thing to do is once you have one side flat, this becomes the reference surface. We're going to put it down and take it to the planer. This is the side that just came off the jointer. This is our flat side. This is our reference side, and we're going to put it down on this. This is our reference surface. And that's going to allow the planer, which has the blades on top, to cut this parallel to the bottom. Okay, so that's it. That just came out of the planer, and now this side has been planed down to be perfectly parallel to this side, and we can see, if we check this with the calipers all the way across, it's exactly the same. And I've done that. It's exactly 1 inch as it turns out. All right, so the next step is with two parallel sides, we need to get these edges square to this side, or one edge, I'm sorry, square to this side. I'll need to pick which one. I could just pick the bottom, and then I'll show you what we do next. Okay, so now once our two faces are parallel, we have to deal with these two sides. And as it turns out, I can only do one of these on the jointer. The reason is because, for example, this board could be thicker here than it is here. I don't know, I haven't measured. But if I were to joint this edge and just simply flip it around and joint this edge, I would still be left with one side that's thicker than the other. So once we come from the planer and we go to the jointer for the jointing operation, we're just going to joint one side. So I'm just going to arbitrarily pick this side to joint. And I can use that face, there's no problem, or I could use that face, there's no problem, because these two faces, remember, are parallel with one another. And then I'll show you what we do after this. Okay, that's done there. This is the side we've just flattened. We can test it because our jointer bed is perfectly flat, and I can see if I look all the way along here, that's perfect. That's great. So this is the only edge we have yet to deal with. So these two faces are parallel. This one is now 90 degrees to those two faces. So I have to deal with this side. Like I said, it could be thicker here or thinner here than it is on the other side. So I've got to do some sort of an operation that's going to make the top of this parallel with the bottom of this. So I'm going to use the table saw. I could, if I wanted to, take this back over to the planer and do it, but I find the table saw pretty easy, and the table saw is the best choice if this were, say, for example, a bigger piece of wood. So I'm going to mark the side that still needs to have work done on it, and I'll take it over to my table saw. All right, this is the point where we're going to bring this piece of wood back to perfect. So I'm going to use my table saw for this. When I rip this here, this edge that I jointed a few minutes ago becomes my reference edge, and this becomes my reference surface. So by putting this here and sending it through the saw, that's going to make this piece of wood such that this edge is parallel to this edge after it comes through. And then I'm going to have a piece of wood that's perfectly square and perfectly parallel on both sides and ready for woodworking. Now, one thing you might do is you don't necessarily have to take all of your wood and send it through this step right away. What you could do is you could hold your wood at this point, because maybe in my furniture building operation, I need a piece of wood that's 2 inches thick. So now would be a good opportunity to set this, say, at 2 inches and cut the piece that I need. So I don't necessarily have to square it all now. I just have to remember which side is not square, and I've done that by marking it. So this side is not square, and if the marks aren't visible enough, you know, we can make the marks very visible. Of course, hard to see on walnut. I had to pick a difficult wood. But this is the edge that's not square. So I might just hold this and mill all of my lumber at once and just leave the one edge not square until I'm ready to cut it for the furniture. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to square this up just to complete what I started here, and that is to end up with a piece of wood that's perfectly square and parallel on all sides. Okay, and that's it. We took that piece of wood that that was rough and had some defects in it, some warping defects, and we have milled it into a perfectly flat and square and parallel piece of wood in order to make furniture with. So I want to talk briefly about some of these other warping defects and sending them through the jointer to get them flat. The principles are the same as what we did with the walnut a minute ago. It's important not to let this go through and rock it. So I don't want to start going through the cutter head, holding this down, and finish going through the cutter head by holding this down, because we're going to end up with a situation where we're going to keep that twist defect in. It's just important to hold it flat and continue to joint one edge. With the piece that has the crook in it, here again, I don't want to do it smiley face up because I could end up rocking this through the cutter head. I want to do it smiley face down. That's going to be the quickest way to get a flat surface. And the cup defect, which is this one, is also basically the same. I don't necessarily want to put it this way, cup down, because as I'm sending it through, I might rock it a little bit. The best way to do it is to send it through this way, where it's a little flat and a little more stable. And that's basically how you handle all of those different warping defects. I'm just going to talk briefly about planers and jointers. There are many different types and sizes you can get. Traditionally with these tools, if your budget permits, you should get a wider jointer. A wider jointer will allow you to surface or to flatten wider pieces of wood. And when it comes to the cutter head, for example, also there's some options. Many of them have straight cutters. I happen to have a spiral cutter head. This is a Grizzly jointer that I have. I'll put a link to all of these tools in the description below in case anybody's interested. But a spiral cutter head basically cuts wood a lot neater and a lot cleaner than a straight cutter does. And if you should get one of these nicked, you can simply remove this screw, take this square cutter out, rotate it 90 degrees, put it back in, put the screw back in, and then your damaged edge is over here, and you have a clean cutting edge. So you can rotate each of these cutters 4 times, and they'll last a really long time. I've had this jointer now for about 2 years. I'm still on I haven't rotated but maybe 2 or 3 of these cutter heads, and it still cuts fantastic. So if you have the budget, if you don't, it's fine. If you have the budget, I would recommend getting a spiral cutter head. If you don't, no big deal. You get a straight cutter head, and you just may replace blades a little bit more often. But either way, you get in the game with the tool, and that's really what matters most. So one thing that I'll do before I joint any edges is I always square my tool, square my fence to the tool. So there's a switch somewhere, or lever somewhere to loosen it, and then this fence will basically rotate. And it's important that it's square. If my fence isn't square, I'm not going to be able to cut squares, cut my stock into square. So I always keep the tool square. I check it periodically, probably once a week, something like that. If I ever make any adjustments before I adjust back, I'll always take the time to square the tool back so I'm dealing with a square tool. That's important. It's also important to keep the tool clean. We cut a lot of woods that are waxy, and so they have a lot of wax that sticks onto the surface. And so I'll take acetone, and I'll put that on a cotton cloth, a washcloth, and I'll keep the surface of the tool scrubbed. That's important to do to keep the tool clean so things flow or things slide smoothly over it. All right, so after cleaning the surface of the jointer, it's time to go over and put some sort of a protective top coat on the cast iron so that it doesn't rust. And most protective top coats will also decrease the coefficient of friction, so my boards will slide over there easier. The 2 most common things that I have been using are paste wax or Bostik Glide Coat. However, Bow Shield has just sent me some stuff to try. So this video isn't sponsored by them, so I'm just sort of trying this for the first time. Although technically I suppose it's not the first time. I have used Bow Shield in the past. It was many years ago, and I haven't used it for quite some time because my local hardware store doesn't really carry it, and so I've kind of stuck with either the paste wax or the Bostik. But we're going to give this a try. One thing that they sent me that I haven't seen before is this rust-free stuff, so I'm going to give this a shot. I do have some areas of rust on my jointer. It's actually completely smooth, so it's not really a problem. But I'm going to try to take it off and see if this helps. Sometimes if the rust isn't completely smooth or you have anything active going on under the surface, it can continue to rust. So it's a good idea to get that out. A common thing for us to do would be use WD-40 and some steel wool, but I'm going to give their product a try and see if that works. Yeah, so that's actually pretty amazing. That worked really well. Okay, so with that done, I'm going to spray on a thin coating of their T9 Bow Shield. This is the stuff that I have used in the past. And that's a pretty thick coat. What I usually try to do is make it a more thin, uniform coat, which will dry a little faster, and then we can buff the excess off. All right, so there's the surface of the jointer, all done, fully protected, and it actually came out really well. That product seems to work really good. We'll find out how it works in the long term. Okay, that wraps up that video. I hope jointers and planers will make a little more sense to you now, and I hope you understand how to use them a little bit better. Thanks for watching.